Welcome back to Conservative Conversations. I'm your host, Reid.
And I'm Frank.
Today we're going to be talking about the second Republican debate, and we're going to be talking about immigration and more. So let's get into it. Before we get started, listeners, I'd like to remind you to subscribe and follow us on your favorite platform. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and you can also find our audios on YouTube. And if you'd like to share your feedback directly, you can check out our emails. Send us an email. You can find those in the show notes in the description below. And we hope you enjoyed our best of episode last time. Putting it together, I thought it was really interesting to see some of the comments we made and compare them to now, particularly the part where I was talking about how some people thought a couple months ago Nikki Haley might be trying to go for Trump's VP spot, but that's obviously not the case now. So I thought that was neat to kind of hear that back and compare things to how what we thought they were going to be compared to how they are now. And speaking of Nikki Haley, I'm going to start off by talking about the second Republican debate that happened recently. I wrote down one thing I liked about all of them, and a couple people I might share some negative comments. And I guess since I mentioned Nikki Haley's name first, I'll start with her. I thought, and these are just things I particularly liked, whether or not I think they had any significant impact on their campaign or not. That's just what I like. But with Nikki Haley, I thought she made a good comment when it came to health care about how part of the reason that healthcare costs are so high is because of government subsidies and the insurance companies and these PBMs, which I forget what it stands for, but they're like a middleman for pharmaceutical companies. And then the pharmaceutical companies themselves all kind of drive up the cost of healthcare. Rather than being able to go to your provider directly, whoever it might be, your local doctor, and paying them directly for what could often be a lower cost, rather than having to go through all these different middlemen, the insurance companies, these PBMs, and the pharmaceutical companies and all that. So I thought that was a pretty good comment for her to make. I don't think too many others made a similar comment. Maybe they did, and I just didn't recognize it. Let's see. Next, my man Doug, who I didn't even think was going to be at this debate. Doug Burgum, the governor from North Dakota.
Yeah.
He had a couple of good things that I liked, but I went with when he was asked about shrinking the size of the government. I think he gave a pretty good line, because one of his explanations was there's like 10 to 20% of like the government bureaucracy, the work that they do, that could be contracted out or engineered out. And then he also gave a good line that he should get these people to create taxes instead of being paid by taxes, which I thought was a good line. Get them back in the private workforce.
Right.
Because there are even jobs currently there are jobs that the federal government contracts out to private companies, most notably, like our defense contracts. So it can probably be done with other, administrative work within the federal government. So I thought that was pretty good line, and he gave a pretty good answer on it. Next I got Ron DeSantis. One thing I sort of keep forgetting about that he mentioned on stage was he's the only candidate to have served in the military, and I think that's a pretty good thing. He's worn many hats. He's worked in the private sector. He's served in the military. He's worked, obviously, as a governor. He's been a congressman. So I think it definitely helps to add to his leadership credentials.
Do you happen to know in what capacity he served in the military?
I believe he had to do with law. He is sort of like a lawyer, kind of. Like, he wasn't in combat or anything, but he went overseas with, like, combat people. And I think he gave he was like some kind of advisor or consultant, maybe. But he was still, like, it was a
active duty.
Yeah, he's still like an active duty military person. I mean, I might be slightly wrong on that, but I believe that's sort of what he did. I'd have to look into that again. But a side note on that, which I thought was kind of silly, right after he mentioned that, Dana Perino felt like she had to mention that Nikki Haley's husband currently is serving in the military. Which, thank you for your service, Mr. Haley. I assume your last name is Haley, because I assume she took his name. But what's that got to do with anything? He's not running for president. We're talking to the candidates running for president on stage.
Yeah.
So, I like that Ron DeSantis is the only
Did you see? I saw that she had just done something with the Clinton Foundation just days before the debates. Dana Perino. She spoke at some kind of... The Clinton Foundation did like an appreciation of news media conference or something like that.
I had not seen this.
Yeah, and Dana was one of the speakers there.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I like that about Ron DeSantis, that he served in the military, and I like that he brought it up again. The crowd gave him pretty good applause for it.
Well, I did go ahead and look it up, and it says that he served as a judge, advocate, general officer.
Okay, I knew it had to do with legal aspect of some sort, because that's what his background was. He went to Yale for law, I believe. Next I got Tim Scott. I didn't like how he started out with this particular thing that he mentioned, because it was following Ron DeSantis being asked about the African American studies curriculum issue in Florida. Where it has, in the curriculum, it has a line about how some slaves use the skills they learned as slaves to benefit them when they were free. Tim Scott said that they should have just taken the line out, and then he said that there are no redeeming qualities about slavery, which is not what's being said in the curriculum. But he did go on to talk about, or briefly mention, how LBJ's Great Society program has really harmed the black community. And I think that's important to point out, because it certainly has. How.
So Tim Scott said that?
About LBJ's Great Society? Yes, yeah.
Okay.
But he started off talking about, because he was trying to respond to this issue in the Florida education curriculum. His comment about that is how he led into his comments about LBJ's Great Society. So the beginning of it I didn't like, but him talking about the Great Society really having a negative impact on the black community is what I did like.
Well, yeah, and it's nice of him to call out LBJ in particular and highlight that, decade, if you will, or that period of history. Because I think a lot of people forget what happened right around there. When they claim the Great Switch happened and all that stuff.
Right, yeah. Yeah, so like I said, I thought it was good for him to point that out. That's definitely one thing that has harmed the black community. As he said, replacing fathers with paychecks in the home.
Yep.
So that was good on him. Let's see, who do I got next? Okay, Chris Christie is the one I actually had the most trouble deciding what I liked, and it's not because I thought he did bad or anything. It just wasn't anything specifically that really stood out. But I finally landed on his comments about pro-life, where he said we have to be pro-life for the whole life.
Yeah.
Which I think is important to point out, because although the pro-life movement is mostly concerned with the unborn, obviously life doesn't stop at that. But the Democrats often talk about how they want to help people who are addicted to drugs and stuff like that. And that's what Chris Christie's comment was kind of getting at, was being pro-life for the whole life and helping people who are addicted to drugs and stuff like that. So I thought it was good for him to point that out, because usually the solutions that the Democrats propose are these facilities where
they can just go in and shoot up.
Yeah, safely go do your drugs, or not even doing anything with them at all, letting them stay out in the streets and shooting up and passing out right in the middle of the public, in the public eye. So I think it's important for Republicans to try to be a little more active on that issue.
Well, I heard that clip in particular that you're talking about, and I find it interesting. You know, Chris Christie, as I've said before, Chris Christie, I think in that right around the same period of that clip where he says pro-life for the whole life, he's talking to the other people on stage and saying, you know, the fight's not really here on the Republican stage.
Right.
The fight's in the bluer places, in the bluer cities, in the bluer states.
Yeah, and he did mention that, you know, we fought hard to get Roe v. Wade overturned, to turn it back to the states, which was a good thing.
Right. But I just think it's interesting the way he, you know, I often credit him for fighting the teachers' unions in New Jersey when he was governor. And he really did, man. He went around to all those town halls and he really gave it to the people. And the teachers fought back and gave him hell, if you don't mind the expression. And he just gave it right back and said, you know, the state's going to go bankrupt. We can't afford this. And I thought it was a fair point for him to, you know, sort of compare himself to the others and say, I've done this. I've done these fights.
Yeah.
You know, even Chris Christie's not my choice candidate. I think he really does have that in his background.
Right.
And I think it's very fair for him to bring it up and say, you know, and remind the Republicans on stage that we really do have to sort of fight back against the blue. It's not just rally together, but we need to start taking it to the streets, you know, like that song.
Yeah, and he did mention, I think he said 14 times he shot down funding for Planned Parenthood in New Jersey.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I thought he did pretty good when it came to those pro-life comments. Next is Mike Pence. He was actually the first person I wrote down something on. It was pretty quick and easy. When they were asking about the auto union strike right now.
Yeah.
Mike Pence was the only one who mentioned, and it doesn't necessarily relate specifically to the current strike, but in unions in general, he talked about the right to work and how workers shouldn't have to join a union if they don't want to, just to work.
Right.
And he didn't mention this, but in the same vein, the companies shouldn't have to hire union workers if they don't want to. They should be able to hire whoever they like to.
Well, I agree with you. And, you know, I didn't bring it up at the time, but when you were talking about Doug Burgum wanting to shrink the size of the government,
right?
I almost thought, well, I hope they're not union, because I don't think there's anything that would prevent the government workers from creating a union. I believe something in my mind says that there is like a government workers union out there or something like that.
Right.
So
that makes sense.
I just wonder if he wouldn't run into trouble, even let's say he was the president, trying to slim down some of these departments, because the union would go nuts and they just, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. That definitely would be a big roadblock. But like I said, I thought it was good for Mike Pence to mention the right to work when talking about the unions. Nobody else did, which I don't necessarily blame them, because they're specifically being asked about the United Auto Workers strike.
Right.
And they were just trying to address that issue specifically. Let's see. Next, I got Vivek Ramaswamy, or as Stuart Barney would say, Ramaswamy. He was asked about birthright citizenship by the Latina moderator. And I thought he gave a pretty good answer. He said that he would end birthright citizenship for illegal immigrants, and he gave a good example, a good comparison of like a Mexican diplomat. If they had given birth to a child while on American soil, that kid's not an American. He's still going to be a citizen, a Mexican citizen. And he gave that same example for an illegal immigrant, because he cited the 14th Amendment, and particularly the line where it talks about people who are subject to the jurisdiction of, I guess, American law. And he made the argument that just like a Mexican diplomat wouldn't necessarily be subject to the American jurisdiction, an illegal immigrant, and they're giving birth to a child while here illegally and not being a citizen or a legal resident wouldn't have those same rights as a American citizen. He definitely explained it much better than I am, but I thought he gave a pretty good answer to the question.
Well, I think it's pretty good. I mean, I'd boil it down a little differently. I've said it before, but how can the rights granted in the Constitution even apply if you're not a citizen?
Right.
So
yeah. Yep.
It makes sense to me.
Yeah, I'd say that's basically what he was.
Right.
Yeah, the gist of it is. Yeah. So I thought that was a good answer. Next I got. Oh nope, that was it. Because I'm back to Nikki Haley. So that was all 7 of them.
Well, there is one more candidate though.
Oh yes. I'm sorry, the one who wasn't there.
Right. Did you have anything on him?
Insert crickets.
Well, I'll tell you. No, it's not insert crickets.
No, I mean there's that was
you
a joke.
Don't have anything.
I don't have anything because he wasn't there.
Well, I'll tell you something funny. I saw him at I don't know exactly what it was, but he was out in Anaheim, California, at a gathering, and he's making fun of Joe Biden. And the clip has gone pretty well viral. It's just hilarious. He's talking about how old and pretty much senile Biden is. And he makes a joke. He tells the crowd he's standing there talking to, he says, "Look, everybody." He says, "I don't know where I am. I haven't been on this stage before." He says, "But it's pretty easy to figure out." He says, "Over here on my left, there's a set of stairs. Over here on my right, there's a set of stairs." He said, "I could go down either set, and I could be off the stage." And he says, "But instead, you look at this guy," and he goes, and he turns around and he faces the backdrop, the wall, and he pretends like he mimes like he's trapped up against the. And he's like, which way do I go? And then he turns back to the microphone and goes, "Where am I?" It's hilarious. If you haven't seen the clip, I think you should check it out because it's just Trump being Trump again and making fun of Joe Biden, but it is so funny.
Yeah, I bet. Definitely sounds hilarious. I was going to give a couple of negatives. I might do that real quick. Pence, his negatives mostly just he needs to go away. He's boring, stuffy. He talks really slow, long pauses. He's a wet blanket. So that's mostly Pence's negative. Doug, my only negative on him was Dana tried to ask him about how he would protect farmers against China, and he was asked that question specifically because there's a lot of farmers in North Dakota. And I thought he gave a good answer on the China aspect, but he didn't really address necessarily the farmer aspect of it. And otherwise, he had been doing pretty good at answering the questions he was asked, but that particular one, I don't think he did so good. I think being that he is in a state where farming's kind of a major industry, he could have done a little better on that. DeSantis, I don't think he did so well at defending himself against Haley's attack about fracking. I mean, he tried to explain it, but I don't think he did that great. And he tried to, at least in my opinion, dismiss it, sort of. So I didn't think that looked good. And I kind of already mentioned Tim Scott's negative, how he sort of, I would say, sided with the Democrats on this line in the Florida curriculum about slavery when he said they just should have taken it out. Let's see, who's next? Obviously, Chris Christie's was the one I'm sure everybody else would say, his Donald Duck line.
Oh, he was so proud of that, too. You should have seen his face.
Oh, wow. It's so bad that Disney should sue him. That's my joke about it.
You duck these debates anymore, they're going to start you Donald Duck. I bet he thought of that in the middle of the night. He woke up out of a dream.
Wrote it down.
Had to write it down. Yep.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Nikki Haley. My only negatives about her, I feel like, was just there's a few times I thought to myself, "Shut up, Nikki. Just shut up."
Yeah.
But other than that, I thought she actually did okay.
She seems so silly. They got in a fight over
the curtains.
$50,000 curtains.
Yeah, Tim Scott brought that up to her. Yeah, that was crazy. And overall, that was one thing about the debates I'd write as a negative. It was a bit more chaotic at times compared to the first one. And I think some of the questions were silly, especially the last one. The whole survivor voting off the island thing. A lot of people seem to have not minded that question because obviously it is on people's minds that who's going to be going. The next one's got to drop at some point, but I think to put that as a debate question was kind of silly. And I'm glad they all kind of shot it down.
Seems kind of silly to me because I look over this list of names and I don't really see. Well, I see one.
Right.
I don't see 8 or whatever it is. 7.
Yeah, 7. And the other negative,
no, it's 8.
Well, if you're counting Trump, yeah.
Yeah.
The other negative I might save, if we get to it later, because it kind of relates to my second topic. But that's all for my take on the debates. I thought it was okay.
We can go right into your second topic if you want.
All right, I suppose we can.
Because I had some notes on that too, and one of them is it didn't seem to me, at least from what I reviewed, I didn't sit and watch the whole debates, the whole kit and caboodle.
Right.
But it seemed to me like the illegal immigration wasn't really hit very hard. And I've been hearing some scary numbers about record crossings in a single day.
Well, before we get too far into it, I'll go ahead and mention what my other negative thing was from the debate. The Latina moderator, when it came to them asking about immigration, she cited what, to me, I think is clearly an old stat of 11 million illegal immigrants in the United States. And I feel like that number's been out since the Obama administration.
Yeah, 11 million is in the States, period. No.
Yeah.
There's no way. Because the numbers I looked up, the official numbers that they put out was 2.2 million for last year.
Right.
Fiscal year 2022.
Just before we came on to record, I was listening to a Fox News rundown where they're talking about the illegal immigration. And 1 week before the ending of the fiscal year, they broke that record with 2.388 million.
Yeah. Well, that's good that you have that number, because what I have in my notes is that we were on track to be about the same. So 2.2 last year, almost 2.4 for 2023. So, and you have to remember, there's not too many people that'll say this, but if that's the official number, you know the unofficial number is much higher.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So to say that there's only 11 million in the country, period, is almost farcical.
Right. Yeah,
Just like, if you don't mind me saying so, but when you have people like Kamala Harris, you know, she did that famous line relatively back at the beginning where she went down to South America and said, "Do not come. Do not come."
Right.
Well, it just seems so disingenuous. We said so at the time. You can always go back and check out our previous shows. I know we called it for what it was. Right.
And we even have, there's been episodes where we've cut in clips of people. And there's one, I'm almost certain, where I put in, it was way back during the 2020 debates, of Joe Biden telling people to come, surge the border.
Yes.
So, yeah.
One, it's just crazy. Because then, you know, immigration was such an issue that there were certain conservative governors or mayors who did the busing, right? And they would bus these people who were willing into the big blue cities to try and make a point, you know, that we can't handle this. Well, now you have people like Kathy Hochul in New York saying, people need to realize before they come that you're not just going to get a hotel room and a hot meal.
Right.
You know, that we are at capacity.
Right.
And we're going to have to bus people to other parts of the country. And it's like, right. So see, I think the conservative governors or mayors or whoever they were that started this busing thing, it really wasn't just a stunt.
Right.
Because it's literally what the Democrats are doing, even if they weren't, you know, in a position. If, let's say, New York wasn't at capacity at the time, they have no hesitancy. If you remember the Martha's Vineyard thing.
They did it right away.
They have no hesitancy when it's their neighborhood to pack these people up and bus them.
Right.
So, I mean, it's really gotten crazy.
Right. And this immigration issue, I would say, is the administration's biggest gaslight. Even a couple of weeks ago, what's-her-face, Jean-Pierre, is saying that Joe Biden is doing all that he can. He's doing all that he can for the immigration, and it's the Republicans' fault because they're not helping them.
Right. Well, even AOC, remember, I know we've covered this before because she even got a bunch of headlines for coming out and saying that it was the administration's weakest issue. Because, you know, the progressives want to see it changed a little differently.
Right.
I think they want less headlines about it.
Right, yeah.
They just want it all to be understood. Okay, come on in and let's stop keeping track of the numbers.
Right.
I think that's what the liberals would like to see.
Right. Yeah, because it's clear the administration is not actually trying to stop the people, because in this interview on the Fox News Rundown that I was listening to, the guy was talking about how in the budget there's funding for the Customs and Border Patrol, specifically not to go towards enforcing the border, but for processing. They just want to process these people. They don't want to stop them and send them back. And because they're also talking about when they got rid of Title 42 back in May, which allowed the government to almost pretty much immediately at the border turn people away, it reverted back to Title 8, which is like our standard procedure where they show up, we process them, we send them right back out. Well, they're not even doing that. They show up, they claim asylum, which this guy in the interview said that the administration has unilaterally expanded to include claims of poverty for asylum, which is not...
Claims of poverty?
Yep, right, exactly. Which is not what's written in the law, I believe. And they just process them and let them in. Tell them, call us later for your court date. And they're not even trying to send them back.
Well,
so this whole thing's a big...
Well, and it
farce,
has to come to a
like
head. It has to come to a head because at some point we're going to be claiming poverty.
Yeah.
The whole country.
Right.
I mean, if you look there, Mitch McConnell was quoted, last week as saying that funding for Ukraine is still his and other top Republican leadership's main focus as far as ending this war with Russia and Ukraine. They just want to send more funding. Right. Now, as you'll see, it wasn't part of the stopgap funding bill, but they're going to be right next week. I promise you, they're going to be on the Senate floor, the House floor, trying to pass more bills and get more money out to Ukraine. Since it wasn't part of this funding package, they're going to be trying. But it's like that's where everybody's mind is let's send more money to Ukraine. Let's send more money to Ukraine. Forget the border. It's like we have a war going on right here at the border, and they don't want to acknowledge it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that was mentioned in this Fox News thing was like one of the first things that they mentioned is there's a picture that one of the chief Border Patrol agents posted of a 2-year-old, or 2-month-old, I believe, abandoned by the river. And this is just getting crazy.
Well, not only that, I don't have the particular number. I'll try to find it to include it in the show notes. But I've seen photographic evidence that I'll cite first where you can tell that this is like 80% men. 80% single men. We're not talking about families with babies, whatever. And then somebody put out a number. I don't know if it was the Border Patrol people themselves, but there's an actual statistical breakdown of male versus female. And it really is, as I recall, something like 80% to 20%. So, I mean, when you think about that, if you remember under Trump, you know, the Democrats were going crazy talking about these family separations down at the border and family detentions.
Right.
Okay. And, here's another thing. I saw over the weekend people like Meryl Streep are telling these stories about these migrants. You know, there's an old woman, the sun is beating down on her, and she's just trying to get across the Rio Grande to reunite with her family. Well, sorry, Meryl, but you're reading a Hollywood script.
Yeah.
That's not what's happening. You look at the numbers, and it's 80% men coming into the country. There's no families. There's no women. There's no children. So, I mean, that should be addressed. That should be the easiest thing to be addressed.
Yeah.
You're a single male. See, you have no family. See, okay, you go home.
Yeah. Go home to your family.
Yes. Wow.
And another stat that was mentioned in this interview is the number of countries that these people are coming from.
Right.
As of, Jessica Rosenthal, the host from Fox, she originally cited, since the ending of Title 42 in May, we returned like 250-something thousand people to 152 different countries. Well, the guy that she was talking to, who's some kind of national security expert, said he believes that number is closer to 164 different countries now, and there's like 190 recognized countries.
Yeah.
So that's outrageous how many different places these people are coming from, and usually we get the impression that it's mostly like migrants from Mexico and South America and stuff like that, which I believe is still a large number, but the increase of people coming from like China, there are a huge number of Chinese nationals starting to come over, which is of concern.
Well, not only that, what kills me about this whole thing is that we have gone over this before. We've been talking about this for a while. And it shows so much, not only a failure of leadership, but just absolute, I mean, I don't even know how to put it, just how absolutely corrupt the government, the powers that be are, because you'd think, like you just said, 160 some countries out of 190, and they're not coming in on airplanes. They're not coming down through Canada. They're not coming into New York, San Francisco, Florida. No, they're coming up through the southern border. Now, isn't that shady?
Yeah. Well, I would say part of that is simply due to the network of cartels that help send these people up here.
But that's exactly what I'm saying. Is it's so shady. It's there is something going on that's funneling these people purposefully through the southern border.
Right. And if the administration actually cared about it, they'd be making bigger efforts to at least control the flow.
Exactly.
Because from day one, they tried to shut down what was in place, like the Remain in Mexico and the Title 42. And like I mentioned before, during the campaign for 2020, Joe Biden told them to surge the border.
They want them to come in.
Yeah.
And they want to stop keeping records.
Yeah. So that is certainly one of the biggest issues growing right now. And I'm glad it was at least mentioned somewhat on the debate stage.
Seems like they should discuss it a little more, though.
Yeah. I think they might, hopefully at least in the next debate, because just the day after the debate, the one and only Elon Musk went down to the border.
Oh.
So, I mean, that's going to help put some eyeballs on the situation.
Well, hopefully.
Yeah. Because it is getting out of hand. Because one of the things, this is probably one of the last things I'll mention, is they're talking about, at least what this guy in this interview said, they're talking about pitching big giant tents in our national parks to house these people. Because we're running out of space already. So it's really going to start impacting the actual American citizens who matter in a big way pretty soon. And
I just hope it won't be too late.
Yeah. Is that all you got on immigration? Because that was my second topic, so we can move on.
That's all I got on immigration. But otherwise, I just thought I'd maybe just sort of hit on a couple of interesting headlines that I saw over the weekend. It seemed like several things happened.
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, I already mentioned that we were able to avert a government shutdown that was looming. They passed a stopgap measure which will fund the government for another 45 days. And the hardline Republicans, as it's being reported, they were able to drop funding for Ukraine out of the package. So like I said, I'm sure there's already been calls for it in the Senate. I'm sure that they're going to be right back to work trying to print some more money for Ukraine.
Right.
But for now, there's no government shutdown, and I'm glad to see that. You know, that's another thing that we've talked about before. I'm not sure that the shutdowns really help because they never stick, and then everybody gets their back pay, and everybody gets raises and whatever. So I'm just glad to avoid that whole song and dance.
Yeah, nobody ever really wins,
Yeah.
And it's... and when we have such a slim majority in the House, it would be better to not
abuse it.
Yeah, damage what little grass we have.
Right.
So yeah, I'm glad the shutdown didn't happen.
I just hope the two groups may be proactive over these 45 days, and that it. I know that's kind of a joke, but I just don't want to hear another fight for the funding 45 days from now.
Yep.
So, it'd be nice if they could just get something comprehensive done.
Right. Yep, that would be nice to see. A good early Christmas present.
Yeah.
They actually get something meaningful done.
Right.
But who knows?
But
I will say, for all the talk about, how McCarthy doesn't have control over the Republican House, he always seems to manage to wrangle them together when it really gets down to crunch time.
Yeah.
He pulled it off this time. He pulled it off back in June or whatever when they were doing the debt limit stuff. I've talked before about how I'm not the biggest fan of McCarthy, and it's mostly because he gives me the heebie-jeebies. He seems phony, like I can't trust him sometimes, but he's done a pretty decent job at being the House Speaker, getting the job done when it comes down to it.
He's just okay.
Yeah, that's what I'd say, I guess, too. He's okay, and he's doing okay.
But I will say this, I don't view him as like a turncoat as like Paul Ryan.
Sure.
When he got the gavel, completely different person, almost overnight. McCarthy is still running around, same McCarthy he was 4 years ago.
Yeah.
At least I can say that for him. He's consistent.
Right.
But
Yep.
So the next headline that really caught my eye was there's been some pretty heavy rainfall in New York that caused a bunch of flooding. I don't know if you saw about this.
No, this I have not heard.
Well, I don't think it's what you'd call flash flooding. Not like super bad flooding, but lots of areas were affected. Basically, all the boroughs in one way or another. Manhattan seems to have been particularly hit. One of the interesting things that I heard, my ears kind of picked up on, was I heard somebody say that JFK, the airport, they had their wettest day since 1948. That's the way one reporter put it.
Okay.
What's that mean? Their wettest day. But some of the subways flooded and got shut down. There's lots of property damage from people's basements. People's, I guess they have a lot of these underground apartments or whatever, like subterranean or whatever you'd call them, under the street level. And so lots of people's apartments were ruined. So like I said, lots of property damage. There was one thing that I saw. Oh, yeah. One lady reported that the sewers backed up. So that was particularly nasty. That was a nasty part of the flooding. But one lady reported that her commode at one point was like a fountain.
Oh,
because
gosh.
if you can imagine such a thing, she had a basement apartment, and when the water started backing up, the sewer started backing up. The water was flooding into her apartment through
out of the toilet.
Out of the toilet, exactly.
Oh my gosh.
So I mean, it was pretty bad. I can't imagine going through something like that. I have seen flooding before, but
that just sounds
it wouldn't be the same way. I've seen valleys flood, rivers flood. I can't imagine just getting so much rainfall that the streets fill up, But I think it was interesting. I don't have the numbers for like all the boroughs and all the little cities or whatever, but there's one city in particular called Park Shop where a local reporter was reporting from, where 3 people had to be rescued from basements.
Wow.
I guess they got trapped in their basement apartments, and 15 people had to be saved out of their apartment buildings. So they were up high and couldn't come down to the lower levels because maybe the lobby was flooded, first floor was flooded, whatever the case may be. They couldn't get out. And then 3 people had to be rescued from basements. So 18 people in one little city of Park Shop. So I can't imagine how many people were affected all over New York. People were probably have to be rescued up and down, basements and high rises all over the place. I did see one where a little video clip where somebody's car got trapped in the water.
Wow.
And an EMS guy had to wade over. It was like up to his waist and pick the guy up. I think he was older guy. Picked the guy up and just slung him over his shoulders and had to carry him to higher ground.
Right.
So, I mean, it was pretty bad, but already some of the water's receding, and people are really just cleaning up now. All the property damage and, septic waste and all that stuff. Yeah.
Well, it makes me think, I wonder how much more fatalities they could discover. Because I imagine in some of these old subways that are still accessible, there are probably homeless people that hang out down there.
Right.
And who knows if any of them might have drowned that haven't been found yet.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought.
Yeah.
But my first thought was actually, I mean, sometimes I can be kind of callous. And I thought, I'm sure this has never happened before in New York. But actually, to put it a little nicer, I was kind of wondering, well, I wonder when the last time was that they had something like this severe or whatever. And so that's why my ears really picked up on that. At JFK, they had their wettest day since 1948. Right. I'm still not exactly sure what that means.
Me neither.
But it at least was some kind of a date that my brain could latch onto. Right. So, I mean, apparently this was pretty bad. Yeah. I don't know if it's like record breaking or anything like that, but it was interesting enough to, catch my eye.
Right. Yeah. That is definitely interesting. I had not heard about that. So that's news to me.
Yeah. Well, I think it's also just since we're still on the topic, it's about to be hurricane season for the Carolinas and the Florida area and that kind of stuff.
We're coming to the height of it, really.
We're leading up to it. And so I just wonder if this will be a tell for the season that's about to come.
Yeah, that's interesting. Maybe they end up getting a lot of hurricanes that go up that way and keep flooding the area.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But the only other story that I have, and it's going to be a big one, I'm sure they're going to be harping on it for days, if not months. 90-year-old Dianne Feinstein died over the weekend. So she was the longest-serving female senator, first elected in 92, which I thought would be interesting for us to mention. Same year we were born.
Yeah.
It's also dubbed the Year of the Woman because
like 6 female senators.
Yeah, because of how many females entered the Congress at that year. But I did learn a couple of things, not too much that I didn't really know already,
Yeah, there's something I learned about her too. I'll share after you go.
Okay. One of the she first got elected out of a special election, which I hadn't really known. That year in 92 was a special election. She first sort of started serving in any kind of capacity in 1969. She was elected to the Board of Supervisors for the city of San Francisco.
You're basically taking mine. Keep
Oh,
going,
really?
though. That's all right. Yeah, keep going.
Well, and she ran for mayor of San Francisco twice, but never won. So that's something I didn't know. I knew she'd been a senator forever, but I didn't know. I guess sort of, and I knew she was from San Francisco, but I guess I didn't know that it was that near and dear to her, that she had got her start on the Board of Supervisors, that she had even ran for mayor twice.
Well, you actually, it's related to what I was going to mention, but you didn't specifically mention what I was going to. While she was the Board of Supervisors, she was the one who found the bodies of Harvey Milk and the other gentlemen that were assassinated. And that's kind of how she got her name in the public more broadly, because she was the one who came out and announced that they had died.
Right. Yeah, I did see that in the reporting, but
and
I don't know.
Another thing I heard even more specifically about that situation, and I'm hearing it from somebody else talking about it, so I don't know. I assume it's true, but she supposedly stuck her finger in one of the bullet holes of the other gentleman to check for a pulse, which there was none.
Well, I'm not sure about that. That's interesting, but I do know that because of that and the publicity she received, the notoriety at that time, she did start pushing for gun issues. And as we know, that's one of her big things that she harped on forever. She's a big take your guns kind of person. The other thing that I found really interesting to remember was following 9/11, she did a 6-year study. Like, she led some kind of panel or something. Over the course of 6 years, they did a sort of investigation into whether or not the military was mistreating, some of the detainees from the whole...
Yeah, I remember that.
Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, sort of the whole Gitmo controversy.
Right.
If that should ring a bell for most people. And I kind of forgot about that. It rings a bell. When I saw some of the clips following 9/11 and in the years,
prior,
after, following.
Oh yeah, that's right.
I'm just being redundant, and it sounds weird, but in the years following 9/11, I do remember a lot of this. And you remember, there'd be scandals every so often. They'd find on somebody's personal computer or on their cell phone pictures of them posing the prisoners certain ways and making them do goofy poses. And
like I've even heard urinating on them.
Yeah, stuff like story. That. Yeah. Stuff that obviously wouldn't be okay.
Right,
but,
of course.
It's just kind of interesting to see that in her highlight reel and go, oh yeah, that was her exposing some of that, or her committee or, her leadership.
Right.
But the other thing is, she wasn't doing too well there at the end.
Right, yeah.
And I know that we talked about that, that she should give it up, pass the torch, that kind of thing. But apparently she worked right up to the last minute because her last recorded vote was Friday.
Wow.
Yep.
That's the same day she died.
Yep. So she worked right up to the end, folks.
Well, I mean, I don't want to keep dragging on for too long, but that makes me wonder, was she really voting?
Well, I think you and I both know
right
that she wasn't.
Right.
But to report that as fact, I don't think we can do.
Allegedly.
Yeah, allegedly.
Yeah. But rest in peace, Dianne Feinstein.
Yes.
Didn't agree with your politics, but from all accounts, I've heard you're a pretty nice lady.
She was a very respectable lady.
Yes, that's what I've heard. Yeah.
And personally, I think she looked a little bit like my great-grandmother, who was one of my favorite people. So, I don't know. We wish her well.
Sure. Well, is that all you got?
That is all I got. It'll be interesting to see who replaces her. I'm sure it'll be a special election, don't you think?
Yep. And then next year there'll be trying to figure out who's going to actually be in that seat.
Yep.
What's his face? Once that seat. Eric Swalwell?
Oh, yeah.
I always get him and Pencil Neck Schiff mixed up.
Mm-hmm. I thought Schiff wanted it, too.
It probably is him. Like I'm saying, I get them mixed up for some reason. I don't know why. But yeah, it will be interesting to see who's going to get replaced and then replaced again. Possibly. Maybe that replacement will run. Who knows? But listeners, we hope you enjoyed this great episode. And if you do enjoy this content, please subscribe on your favorite platform. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, YouTube, and many other platforms. And if you'd like to reach out to us directly, be sure to send us an email. You can find those email addresses in the show notes in the description below.
And as always, thanks for listening.